It's welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course, everyone. Let's bow in. Michael.
Okay, so we are continuing to study and contemplate Mingyur Rinpoche's book, In Love with the World. And before I begin talking about chapter 6, which is what I'm going to be mostly talking about tonight, I wanted to share a small insight that I had earlier this week that does relate, or will relate eventually, to what I'm going to be talking about. And it's really a fairly simple situation. I was, sitting here in meditation, and in the yard outside, right outside my window, there's a tree, a weeping cherry tree that's actually a tree that I'm fairly attached to. It blooms in the spring, and for 2 weeks it's just beautiful. And then, like a weeping willow, it has these drooping branches, and it's just a very nice tree. And this particular day, it was very windy, and the tree was sort of swaying back and forth in the wind. It was like watching someone dance. And then every now and then the wind would intensify, become a little more violent perhaps, or a little more sudden. But what I realized as I'm watching this tree and how that it was constantly changing. And yet in my mind, I have this concept of tree that's fixed. And it's only when I actually see the actual tree that I appreciate this ongoing dance, this ongoing series of changes, transitions that's going on. And kind of realize that that's how we often relate to the world, that we live in a world of concepts that are kind of fixed, stale, and dry, that don't change. And that we only realize things change when something happens that's so sudden, so significant, that it really changes in a very significant way what we're looking at. If the tree were to, for instance, be knocked over in a microburst, which has happened to other trees in the neighborhood, I would realize then it has changed. But as I'm watching it, I realize it was constantly changing, not just in its movement, but in other ways too. Every now and then a stick or a leaf would come loose. The shape was changing. But to really appreciate that, I had to be in something of the mind of now. And I think this is exactly what's being talked about in the chant, where it says, awareness is the body and meditation. Whatever arises is fresh, clear, vivid, now. And yet that's not where we live, not where we are much of the time. And as we practice meditation, we come to see that ever more clearly. And I think that our sense that things don't change, that things are fixed, that things exist in some way that they actually don't, is because of how much we live in a world of concept. What Tergar Rinpoche, back when we read his book sometime back, called deluded mind. Not as deluded as a mind that's totally enraged with anger, for instance, or so caught up in passion that, again, there's a misperception of a different sort. But that we actually can let go and just live, allow ourselves to just be in the moment, be in present awareness, then we do recognize that things are not fixed in any way whatsoever. In any case, that's just a prologue, I guess, of my own sort for the chapter that I'm going to be talking about, chapter 6, which is titled, What Will You Do in the Bardo? Which in itself is a pretty powerful question to contemplate once we understand what bardo means. And I think many of us have some idea of that because of the book that we studied prior to this text, the Luminous Emptiness, the book by Francesca Fremantle, that talked about the bardos and the bardos of the dying state and so on. And so what Mingyur Rinpoche is going to present in this chapter, for some of us, should seem somewhat familiar. In any case, he begins this chapter by just repeating the question that his father asked, what will you do in the bardo? And the context for that question was his brother, older brother, he doesn't name names, but his older brother had gone to live in a busier, more populated section of Kathmandu, which is a city in Nepal. And this particular section of town was much noisier, much busier, much more chaotic, more sounds, smells, taste, all the senses. And his brother said, I cannot meditate, I cannot maintain any mental composure, my sleep is fitful, and I feel stressed all the time. And with that, Mingyur Rinpoche's father, Tulku Ujin, said, with concern, gently asked, what will you do in the bardo? So the particular bardo, of course, that I think he's talking about is the bardos that one experiences after death, which for those of us who were here when we talked about luminous emptiness, we know that the bardo states, the bardos that one traverses after death, sensory experiences, it's a process of tremendous sensory overload. Really, it's a very direct experience of one's own mind, that what one is actually experiencing are the underlying fundamental energies of mind, and and that without some ability to maintain some kind of mental composure or some stability, the bardos are completely overwhelming and terrifying, particularly the bardos after death. In any case, that was the question. What Mingyur Rinpoche said at the time, what he remembered, because this is when he was much younger, he said, what I remember from this exchange is that the city sounded exciting, and I could not wait to visit my brother there. And even though I had no idea what bardo meant, I intuited that my father was reproaching my big brother and found this exchange very amusing. So then he begins talking about just a very brief review of the bardos. If we remember again from the luminous emptiness text and as it's described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, more truly should be called the Liberation Through Hearing, that there are 6 bardos. There are bardos of this life, the bardo that is our experience from birth to death. That includes the bardo of meditation, what we experience in meditation practice, and what Mingyur Rinpoche calls the bardo of sleep, but more commonly, or in other contexts, is called the bardo of dreams. And in each one of these experiences, as again Francisco Fremantle described in Luminous Emptiness, our conscious experience is very different. Our experience in dreams is very different from what we experience in waking life. And yet, there's an underlying continuity. And the underlying continuity is mind itself, the mind that experiences all of this. And then, with the related to death and dying, there are traditionally three bardos. The bardo of dying, which begins from the moment one contracts the physical condition that will actually bring about the end of life, disease, or some kind of injury. Then there's the bardo of dharmata, which is, again, the bardo of really a direct experience of mind. And this is where one encounters the peaceful and wrathful deities and all of the energies and the very dramatic display of, the very direct encounter with mind itself. And then finally, the bardo of becoming, which is actually what Mingyur Rinpoche focuses on a great deal in this chapter. In the bardo that occurs after dying and after the bardo of dharmata, the bardo of becoming is where the mind, which is separated from the body at death, begins looking for, seeking a new form, a new body to be born into. It's said that the bardo of becoming in particular is characterized by really intense hope and fear, and have terrifying groundlessness and tremendous hope. So there's both grasping and fear. It's a very powerful, unsettled experience of mind. Mingyur Rinpoche says that impermanence frames this entire cycle, and is particularly prominent in the bardo of this life, the span from first to last breath. So impermanence in the sense of constant change, and it's particularly prominent in this life because it's what we're aware of now. But once we begin to pay attention, once we let go of our concept and are actually able to just see and just be, then what we see, hear, feel, smell, taste, think, experience is changing constantly. And again, we may not be aware of that if we are caught up in concept until something happens that's significant enough that it registers as a change. But in ways large and small, everything we experience is in a process of change. So much so that when we actually can pay attention to it, we realize that in fact, what we think of as really existing things are probably more accurately described as processes, as things in flux, things undergoing change after change after change. And that in fact, so much of what we take to be real and graspable, in fact, we can't pin down outside of the dreamlike world of our concepts. In any case, during this, Mingyur Rinpoche also emphasizes in relation to the bardos that during this lifetime, nothing takes greater advantage of our precious human existence. And again, precious human existence is another way of saying this precious life that we have now, where we're born with the good fortune of being able to encounter, contemplate, and practice the dharma, which is what makes this a precious human existence. That nothing takes greater advantage of this than familiarizing ourselves with our minds, that getting to know our minds, and essentially meditation is the most effective tool for which to accomplish this. So I'd almost say if there's any one thing to take from this chapter, it's that sentence right there. Nothing takes greater advantage of our precious human existence than familiarizing ourselves with our own minds. And essentially meditation is the most effective tool with which to accomplish this. There are traditional teachings about different factors that lead to enlightenment. And the very first one is confidence. Confidence that we ourselves have within us awakened potential, awakened seed, if not fully awakened Buddhahood, and confidence that what we're taught and that what we can practice and what we can experience in meditation will lead us to liberation ultimately. Another factor that's a part of this is effort, that we have to make an effort to realize this, that it won't just fall in our laps, that we actually have to work with ourselves, or as he says, familiarize ourselves with our minds. And that it's understanding that that nothing takes greater advantage of our precious human existence than familiarizing ourselves with our own minds. And essentially meditation is the most effective tool with which to accomplish this. That the sense of confidence and the sense of effort, and then a sense of joy, because we realize even if we're not fully liberated, at least we get a glimpse of what's possible. How important these are in terms of bringing us to practice, study, and contemplate the Dharma. In any case, he goes on to talk about the bardo of becoming. And again, what will you do in the bardo? And we're asked in this chapter to think for ourselves. What will we do when we experience our life as being interrupted by undesired circumstances? What will we do when we experience our life as being interrupted by undesired circumstances? Will we maintain a steady mind that can accommodate what we don't want and actually be a benefit to ourselves and others? Or will we implode through fear, anger, or loss of control? We ask these questions. How do we act when we do not get what we want, or when we do not want what we have, or what we do get? And those are just, by the way, those last two sentences, how do we act when we don't get what we want, or when we don't want what we do get, are just two of the things that make up the Buddha's first noble truth, the truth of suffering. In any case, he notes that he's in the bardo of becoming right now. Mingyur Rinpoche at this point in the text, as he's riding the train from Gaya to Varanasi, that he's in the bardo of becoming at this point right now, between the death of the, as he says, between the death of the old me and the birth of whatever comes next. Then he goes back to talking a little bit about conventional understanding of the bardos. Again, bardo is a word that means gap, interval, in between one thing and another. That conventionally it's understood in Tibet as in regard to birth and rebirth, the birth of this body, leading inevitably to old age and death, and then rebirth in another body. But he says that many teachers transmitted the Bardo teachings as an inner journey of mind, which is now his understandings. And that's really what he wants to focus on, I think, here, is this inner journey of the mind. That the conventional notion of the Bardo of becoming is that at that point, a person, a being, enters a stage in between, that's the Bardo, the gap, in between the physical death of this body and rebirth into a new form. That at this point, conventionally, again, in a conventional understanding of the Bardos, the mind loses its lifelong mooring in this body, and continues beyond the death but mind itself continues beyond the death of the body. But as he says, with a broader application, and this is what he means by the inner journey of mind, as he says, we don't need to wait to die in order to know the Bardo of becoming. And he says, again, most of us have had plenty of experience with feeling sane and stable, and then sometimes we fall apart. We can't hold it together. The patchwork, well, I'll come back to that in a minute. The patchwork unravels and the ground beneath us drops out. We find ourselves in between one state of mind and another. In extreme cases, we find ourselves in totally unfamiliar and frightening mental landscapes. Notion of patchwork is interesting there, because really that is a very shorthand way of describing ego. The conceptual sense of self that we create and recreate moment to moment to moment. Because that's exactly what it is. It's a patchwork that's put together constantly. And again, if we slow down in meditation, we sometimes see it that way. We realize that how we feel in one moment is really different from how we feel the next moment. What we perceive is different from moment to moment. What we think we're doing is different from moment to moment. And just as there was a difference for me in watching the tree outside, as opposed to just relating to my concept of that tree, in the same way, ego is a construction that is a patchwork that's put together and comes apart constantly. And that's what he's talking about. When we can't hold it together, it just completely unravels. And we experience real groundlessness. And he says, when that happens, when we have those experiences of things just giving away, falling apart, as he says, we desperately strive to get back on firm ground, to feel safe, supported. Even when, this is another interesting sentence, even when we identify safety as a small isle of familiar mental territory that is habituated to misperception. So that's going back into the patchwork. That's going back into what Trungpa Rinpoche in the Shambhala teachings called the cocoon, or in Buddhist teaching, more traditional Buddhist teachings, what we consider to be a self or an ego as some kind of a real thing. It's exactly that, a small isle of familiar mental territory that's habituated to misperception. And the misperception is to take things as real in a way that they're not, and to have a sense of solidity about things that aren't solid at all, things that are, again, going through constant change, constant impermanence. He says that Bardo can be understood to mean this very moment. And in fact, that's really the only Bardo there ever really is. Just as the only reality there ever really is just this present moment. All the rest is a dream or a story about the future or about the past. And it's only when we're actually able to really settle into just this present moment, right here, right now, that there's ever any kind of real reality, if we can call it that. He says the nowness of this moment is the continual suspension or pause in between our transitory experiences, both temporal and spiritual, and he says, such as the tiny halt that exists between this breath and the next, or the arising of this thought and the next. So another word for this is gap. That every now and then we experience in meditation or in daily life under the right circumstances that there's a gap between one thought and the next. And suddenly we're just fully present, fully here. And that's the real bardo. That's the real experience of bardo. Not the concept of bardo, but the real experience of bardo. When we actually find ourselves here and now with whatever we might be experiencing, whatever we might be perceiving, thinking, feeling. So he says a little bit more about bardo, and again, some of this is in a conventional sense, like he says, between the space between two trees or two cars. We can identify again a sense of gap in space itself, that it's the space that provides definition. In other words, that there's some kind of separation. Or we can understand this interval, again, this bardo, as the emptiness that allows us to see form. And again, it's just simply being present, awake and aware. And he says, actually, everything is in between. And again, this comes back to the notion of rather than seeing things as permanent in the sense of unchanging, as well as, well, we'll get interdependent in a little while. Again, just seeing that everything in reality is in constant flux, constant change. Again, maybe not a change that from the point of view of conceptual mind is a significant change. We still think that something maintains some kind of identity inherent in it that it doesn't, until something really significant happens. But again, actually everything is in between. As he says, however minuscule the interval might be, it always exists. Everything exists between something else. From this perspective, the reference of intermediate in between, to the state between death and birth emerges, he says, as the prototype for transitions that occur within this life cycle. This is kind of a complicated way, and I think there's probably more than one way to understand this and a couple of other sentences that I want to highlight in this chapter. But again, it's similar to what we talked about when we studied the Bardo teachings before, that in fact, obviously the physical death of one's body is, there's no denying, that's a major event. But from the point of view of the Bardo teachings, we're actually experiencing death all the time. That you could think of death as just, one more word for change, that things are constantly changing, that the self that got up this morning with all kinds of determination to get something done, maybe within an hour, dies into the self that feels, well, maybe I'll just take a break for a while. Or, the self that's sluggish and tired suddenly develops some kind of inspiration or aspiration to do something. And so one self dies, another self emerges. And from the point of view of Bardo, it's, again, just a process of continuous change. And as he says, the Bardo teachings then illuminate how these iconic death-to-life transitions, moment-to-moment transitions, emerge in everyday life experience. And he says, without some understanding of these natural transitions, without some ability to relate to or perceive or understand the process of change, it's easy to get stuck. And he tells the story of the woman that he read about who wanted to divorce her husband, not because of some major breach of trust, but just because he's not the person I married. Of course, it'd be interesting to know more of that story, but that's not the point. The point that he's making is, what if we entered relationships more like we enter a train? We know the train will move, stop, go through different landscapes. So his point that he's trying to make is, what if we entered relationships knowing that the thrill of new romance, or the excitement of a new business partnership, or the initial encounter with a spiritual teacher, maybe even how you felt about this talk tonight, won't be the same in the future as it was in the beginning? What if we expected new positive circumstances to change rather than wish they stayed the same? As he says, the train makes many stops, but when it does, we don't try to prolong them, and we don't expect to stay in one place. So what he's talking about here is, if rather than expecting unrealistically that things will stay the same, that things will stay fixed, that things won't be fresh, which is how they actually are in the present moment, instead we enter into situations knowing something of the nature of impermanence, something of the nature of change, then our relationship to things will be very different. We could be more appreciative of the moment. We could actually be more engaged with the moment, more engaged with the people around us. And we wouldn't get as caught up in grasping and disappointment when inevitable change does occur. He goes on to say, the bardos show us that everything is in transition, and whether becoming, again, the bardo of becoming, the bardo of moving from one state into looking for the next state, the next experience, the next situation. That's the bardo of becoming. Whether becoming applies to transitions between mental identifications within this lifetime or over many lifetimes, it doesn't matter. The challenge remains the same. To liberate ourselves by letting go of grasping onto our self-constructed narratives. So that's the challenge that we face. To liberate ourselves by letting go of grasping onto our self-constructed narratives. And he goes on to say, even though we can't pinpoint the exact beginning or ending of anything, this again goes back into really the ungraspable nature of things, that the more we look, if we even try to define where does one moment change into the next moment, the more we look, the more we divide it up, the more we realize you really can't grasp the beginning or ending of anything. Again, because it's a constant process of change, and that it's only in the world of conceptual identification that there seems to be a beginning and an end. Anyway, even though we cannot pinpoint the exact beginning or ending of anything, including the bardo stages, the gathering of things into categories can be helpful. So when he's talking about the gathering of things into categories, he is talking back into how conceptual mind might be helpful to us. And the reason for this, or what he's trying to get at, and this is again, this is a paragraph toward the end that would really be good to talk about in discussion group, because I think there are several ways that we could understand what I'm about to read. Each bardo gathers together characteristics that are particular to each stage of our journey. The characteristics of the natural bardo of this life offer opportunities for waking up that are interdependent, although not the same, as the opportunities for waking up when we're dying. To become familiar with the characteristics that lend themselves to waking up at each stage means to recognize heightened opportunities for turning confusion into clarity. So I think what he means here, again, is that the more we're able to recognize impermanence, the more we're able to recognize the ongoing nature of change, fundamental change throughout everything that we experience, both in ourselves and in phenomena and others in the world around us, the more we're able to recognize egolessness, which is essentially what this is pointing to, identitylessness, selflessness, whatever we want to call it, that the more we're able to understand that in moment-to-moment experience in our life now, the more able we'll be to recognize opportunities for waking up in every bardo. Because ultimately in every bardo, what it comes down to is our mind and what we experience in mind. Which is why, to go back to the beginning of this chapter, he really stresses the importance of becoming familiar with our minds, seeing how our minds work, how we construct stories and fall into dreams and solidify things, take things to be real in a way that they're not, and then wake up and see through, let go. And again, we do this to liberate ourselves by letting go of grasping onto our self-constructed narratives. And And doing this allows us to turn confusion into clarity. So the conceptual piece here is, again, as with many teachings that have a highly conceptual quality, are again sort of like the metaphor of a finger pointing to the moon. The point isn't to get caught up in the concepts, but to see in our experience what the concepts are pointing to. It's like the story of the person pointing to the moon to the child, and the child looking at the pointing finger rather than looking at the moon itself. And with any conceptual teaching, ultimately that's what we want to get to. Anyway, with that, he brings himself back to again his experience on this train that's traveling from Gaya to Varanasi, which Varanasi is an even bigger city than Gaya. Anyway, he says, with the help of breathing exercises, the speed of the grasping mind slowed down, allowing me to connect with a subtle level of constant change. So speed of the grasping mind is interesting in itself too. I think I've shared before that when I was being taught how to meditate, sometimes meditation was presented to me as a slowing down process, sometimes a settling process, some simplifying. And in some ways, there's three different ways of describing the same thing. But the speed of mind refers to a couple of different things. I mean, you could say one thing, it's the speed with which, when we're really worked up, one thought just follows another after another. But it also refers to the speed with which a thought arises and we take it to be true or real, and then begin reacting to that as well. So it's the speed not only of one thought leading into another, but the speed with which a thought no sooner arises than we take it to be real, and we find ourselves becoming angry or depressed or whatever because of the thought, and then elaborating further. And again, when we can relax, slow down, let go in meditation, we sometimes see this. We see how a single thought mushrooms into an entire world, and that's the speed of grasping mind that he's talking about slowing down. And when he does that, then he was able to connect with a subtle level of constant change. He says, every instant that brings attention to change, every time we're able to do this, slow down and just look and see, every instant that brings attention to change helps us to stabilize the understanding of impermanence as the immutable condition of our lives. So it's not as if impermanence is a choice that we either experience or don't. It's always there. It's just whether we are aware of it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we're open to it or not. He says, as a path toward liberation, intellectual acknowledgement of impermanence must become integrated with embodied experience, really felt, really on a gut level, embodied experience. Then we gain more support for giving up grasping at those things we cannot truly hold. And gives him whether that means our bodies, the bodies of the people we love, our roles in life, our prestige. So he closes this chapter, What Will You Do in the Bardo, by saying, even on the train, I had known glimpses of naked awareness free from waves. Remember we talked about the awake mind being like the ocean, and the various thoughts, feelings, and sense perceptions being waves on the surface of the ocean. I had known glimpses of naked awareness free from waves, not entirely, but mostly free. Glimpses of pristine awareness can be transformative, but it takes work to stabilize the view. So we have these glimpses, but we have to make an effort. It won't just happen. We have to actually work with ourselves, work with our minds. That's why we say short moments many times. It's a quintessential Mahamudra instruction, short moments many times. So that's both in the context of formal meditation practice, but in our lives. We have moments when we wake up, and in that moment, we can be present. Many times, he said, I'd learned something about impermanence and definitely embodied the benefits of my training, but that was with familiar enclosures, with protections and safeguards. And that concludes the chapter, What Will You Do in the Bardo? Oh, John, you're muted.
Yeah, I was just having some difficulty there. So is the recording on? It seems to be. What do you think?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay,
yes.
that's good. So picking up where Michael left off, we're on chapter 7, Lessons from Milarepa. Really what the occasion for this book is that Mingyur Rinpoche decided to leave behind his privileged position as a High Lama, as a revered Rinpoche, as an abbot of a monastery, and to go off into the world naked, as it were. Not literally physically naked, but naked without any protection of status. Now, he doesn't do it initially, he still is wearing his robes, but that's what he's working toward. This kind of exposure, of giving up everything that supports his current way of life. As I read about this, I thought about myself, because I've always often had thoughts similar about leaving this protected way of life here in this lovely little house in the mountains, and going out and wandering and begging for food to see what would happen if I gave up all of my supports and what it would be like. And I found the thought of doing that frightening, challenging, scary. And then just the other day, I realized that in fact I did this. Just that. When I was 19 years old, I was a sophomore at Yale College. And I felt that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why I was there, what purpose it was serving. And I discussed it with my parents, and I decided to leave for an indeterminate period of time. Yale at that time was divided into 12 what they called colleges. These were undergraduate residential facilities. I was in one called Davenport. And I went to the dean of my college and professor, told him what I had in mind, and got his approval and the approval of the administration of the college. And after that sophomore year, I left. I had no real idea of what to do, but my parents helped me secure, this is still under their protection, through a friend of theirs who was a magnate in shipping. He made his living shipping things from the Far East to the United States, and he put in a word for me, or got me somehow in front of the Coast Guard, and I got my Merchant Mariner's documents. It's a little card about this big, somewhat bigger than a driver's license. And I remember the picture on it of me with a lot of wavy, dark brown hair, full lips. And that was my Merchant Mariner's, what they call the Seaman's card. And with that card, I went down to the Union Hall in Brooklyn. We lived in New Jersey. And I started waiting for ships to catch a job. The competition for jobs was pretty intense, and it took me a while, but eventually I caught a job on a ship as a wiper. The wiper is probably the worst job you can get on a ship. You're low man in the engine room. Your job is to clean up oil and grease and It's hot down there. I mean, at times you work in what's called the fiddly, which is the very top of the engine room where the heat rises up, and up in the fiddly, you hang from maybe a bosun's chair. It's called like a seat that hangs from the ceiling, and you strip down to your underwear because it's 140 degrees up there. The heat rises. And I went to Hawaii on this ship. It was a freighter, 600 feet, World War II vintage. And in Hawaii, I was working really hard, and we stopped at one of the outer islands, and they opened up one of the fireboxes. There are 2 fireboxes on a ship like that. It's a small freighter, 600 tons. And they opened up one of the fireboxes. One of the fireboxes is a box about 10 by 10 lined with pipes. Each pipe is about 2 inches in diameter. And these pipes, there's a steam turbine outside these boxes that generates steam, and it shoots it in through those pipes into the box. And then there's a port in the front of the box where there are fire tubes that go into the box and burn diesel fuel and heat that steam that's in those pipes to turn it into superheated steam, which is then released and drives the ship's turbines. And these pipes become coated with carbon over time. And so they sent me and the other wiper, there were 2 of us, into these boxes. There were 2 boxes like this. They'd open up this 2-foot port. You'd strip down. I stripped down to my shoes, socks, underwear, and a mask. And that was it. Oh, and goggles. And the mask was really insufficient. Otherwise, I was naked. And into that box, in that heat, with soot so thick you couldn't see from one side of this 10-foot box to the other. And in there, I had a bucket and a brush, and I was cleaning the pipes. So I hated it, of course. We did this at one of the outer islands. I think it was Kauai. And then we went on to Oahu and Honolulu. And I knew that I was going to be asked to go in and clean on the weekend, put in overtime and clean the second box. And I was standing on deck. It's like a Friday. And I met a fellow who came from another ship. And he was looking for a friend of his, and we got to talking. Couldn't find his friend, so he invited me to come and stay with him ashore for the weekend. We go look for girls and have a good time. I saw my way out before they could ask me to clean that second firebox. His name was Vincent Tividad. He was half Mexican, half Apache Indian. And he referred to himself as El Tigre. I didn't prepare, or I could show you a photograph of him. The tiger. And we spent the weekend, and on Sunday, I came back to the ship to resume my work there. It was gone. They had sailed early to get back to San Francisco. Well, I was very happy. I went down and collected my back pay at the Seafarers International Union office, and they warned me if it happened again, I'd lose my papers, my seaman's papers. And then Vic and I spent about 10 days, 2 weeks, I don't know, goofing around in Honolulu. And then we went to Los Angeles and hitchhiked from LA to Las Vegas, where his aunt lived. And we got to Las Vegas in the middle of the day, and we're standing on a street corner. Vic called his aunt to come pick us up. She was married to a dealer at the Golden Nugget Casino, a guy named Whitey Germain. And we're standing there, and the casino across the street catches fire. And it takes 3 hours, and it burns to the ground while we stand there waiting. And eventually his aunt comes and picks us up. And we get in the car, and as soon as we get in, she floors it, and he's trying to get out. He told me he could tell from her face that his mother was there. And the last time he'd seen his mother, she had taken a shot at him. She was really angry with him because he'd left his wife, whom she loved. So we get to the house, and there's his mother standing on the front step. Big Indian woman, Apache Indian, heavy, bronze skin. She dyed her hair flaming red. She takes Vic by the hand with me following behind into the house, this little tract house, into her bedroom, lifts the pillow, and there's a silver-plated, nickel-plated revolver. So I spent the next couple of years living with Vic off and on like that. In thinking about it, I'd walked away from Yale, from my parents, from my whole background. Vic became my best friend. We lived together with friends of his, all lowlifes down in New Orleans, walking the streets there. And I loved it. He would go off and catch a ship, and so would I, and then eventually we'd regroup and find each other again in New Orleans. And I didn't think anything of it. And I hadn't called my parents in months. And one day I called my parents after, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months. And they told me that the FBI was out looking for me because I'd failed to show up for a draft physical. So I caught a bus with Vic. We went up to my parents' house. They met him. They were horrified. He was this skinny guy with bronze skin, wore a big zoot suit, like a big sport coat that went all the way down to his knees, baggy pants. And I took him up to Yale with me and saw my dean and got the dean to write a letter to the draft board saying I was coming back that fall. And if that hadn't happened, I might have never gone back. I might have stayed a merchant seaman all my life. Who knows? But I did go back. And I thought, so I did do what Mingyur Rinpoche did, cut loose from my moorings. But it was really easy. There wasn't anything big deal about it or hard. And I made this terrific friend, Vic. Can't find him anymore. He's probably dead by now. He was 10 years older than I. I was 19. I think he was in his late 20s. Met a lot of his friends in New Orleans. So I'm telling you this story because these things can happen to us, and you hardly even notice as they go by. I mean, I noticed, but I didn't regard it as being this great adventure. But Mingyur Rinpoche sure does. He's cutting loose from his moorings, from his role as a respected, revered Lama. And this chapter begins by noting that by going off into this homeless life, Mingyur Rinpoche was following in the footsteps of Milarepa, Talopa, Naropa, and many other adepts in his lineage. Read their stories. If you haven't read their stories, read their stories, their biographies. You can find them online. They're all terrific, and all of them very similar. There's a similar pattern. I wrote, throughout my years of wandering, these predecessors were my companions, and on the train, this is Mingyur Rinpoche. And on the train to Varanasi, they visited frequently, especially Milarepa, my boyhood hero. Milarepa had wandered through a landscape that looked like my own district of Newbury. This is, again, him speaking. Milarepa's village sits at the base of Mount Manaslu, the 8th highest mountain in the world. Mingyur Rinpoche writes, I had shuddered at the idea of eating fish guts like Talopa did. Talopa just got completely loose. In any form of support, he took fish guts that were cast aside by fishermen as being unusable and he ate them. But even though Milarepa had turned green from a steady diet of nettles, I still wanted to do what he had done, sleep under stars and feel at home in the world. This is Mingyur Rinpoche writing. Mila had so many incarnations in one lifetime that his path intertwined compassion and violence, abundance and poverty, misery and mercy. Nothing about my understanding or my adventures adds up to a thimble compared to Milarepa's. Yet the expanse of his life widened the gates of possibility for me, and he really cut loose. As a child, Mila had sustained hardships I would never know. And then by demonstrating the importance of practicing in retreat, he, Milarepa, influenced the entire tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and boy did he ever. Thousands and thousands of meditators have manifested the qualities of enlightenment because of his, Milarepa's, dedication. Tulku Ujin said, now Tulku Ujin is Mingyur Rinpoche's father, and he was a very high lama. And just as an aside, I'll just tell you, he had 4 sons, one of whom I don't know much about. The other three were all lamas. Chikyi Nyima Rinpoche, whom I never met or received any teachings from. And these other 2, Mingyur and Sokni Rinpoche, both of whom I've met. In fact, we invited them to the Westchester Buddhist Center, both of them, and they both came and taught, and they were terrific. So Tulku Ujin was their father. He had these 4 sons by, I guess, 4 different women. And he was quite a revered teacher in his lifetime. He came and visited here in Boulder once. It was on Midsummer's Day, which we just had. And we had a celebration down in the meadow south of Boulder in a park. And there was a tent. And Tulku Ujin sat under this big tent on a platform with Trungpa Rinpoche and maybe 1 or 2 other people, probably the regent, who was Trungpa Rinpoche's Dharma heir. And Rinpoche wouldn't let him speak. I have no idea why. He wouldn't let Tulku Ujin address us. Tulku Ujin said, I've been in retreat almost half my life. This is a genuine way to help others. If you want to preserve the lineage, transform your minds. You won't find the true lineage anywhere else. And I highly recommend solitary retreat. And anybody who's interested, talk to me, and we'll set up a program. But you should start solitary retreat very gently, with simply maybe a couple of days, 2, 3 days max. And then you can work up. Myself, I've done a month, quite a few times, but not lately. It's challenging, very challenging, to be alone with your own mind in the wilderness for an extended period of time and doing the Dharma. It really brings the Dharma home. So, Mingyur Rinpoche writes, it was still dark out with no sign of dawn. Most of the people on the train were sleeping rather than talking. I could not have been on this train for more than 5 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. I have traveled through bizarre landscapes, inhabiting the hell realm 1 minute to the next, yearning for protection, like a creature in the realm of the hungry ghosts who never knows satisfaction. Then I'll return to meditation and to gather my mind to just be, minus the distortions. Fear, despair, glimmers of courage, and open awareness, my first night of departure from being the privileged, coddled, taken care of Rinpoche. My first night, I am learning that I cannot inhabit the wandering yogi mind overnight. I'd learned about the 6 realms of existence on a visit to my older brother, Chikinima Rinpoche, at his monastery in the Buddhist section of Kathmandu. I was 6 or 7 years old at the time. An elderly monk was assigned to show me around. This monk explained the Wheel of Life painting, depicting the 6 realms. You know the 6 realms, right? We've been through them. Each characterized by a prominent affliction, each affliction with the capacity to be transformed into wisdom. So the hell realm, the realm of anger, right, has the capacity to be transformed into complete wisdom. The entire wheel is held in the grip of Yama, the Lord of Death. He became impatient with the old monk's explanation. Mingyur did. Besides, his father, who in his estimation knew more about everything in the whole world than anyone else, had already explained to him that hell was a state of mind, not a location. He had insisted that horrific descriptions of the hot and cold hells didn't point to the next life, but to this one. Their real intention, he explained, was to awaken us to the self-imposed punishment that anger inflicts, and does it ever. When we act out of anger, we punish others and ourselves. Our equanimity evaporates. Our hearts shut down. The capacity to give and receive love freezes on the spot. We tell others, go to hell. This is hell realm. My father had also explained, the Tsukujin, that within the wheel of suffering our neurotic spinning contains the seeds of liberation, and that the human realm provides the best opportunities for waking up. It's the best combination of the suffering of the realms and the sanity or the freedom from suffering of the higher realms, which allows us to pursue the path. This meant I could get enlightened in this life, in the human realm. I just wanted to learn meditation and get off the wheel, and the old monk was telling me how to do that. I broke away and ran off to find my brother, he writes. On the wheel, the 6 realms move from lesser to greater anguish, from the God realm down to the hell realm. Although we do not experience them in any particular order, and they are not to be taken too literally. For example, we do not have to be wealthy to know the characteristics of the God realm. But the traits of this realm often set one apart, and wealth can be used to keep one separate or above others. So the God realm is full of pleasure. That's what characterizes the God realm. You're happy. Mostly. Not always, but mostly. My own sense of separation was partly a result of my privileged upbringing and of my role and rank within the monastic enclosures. These are themselves a form of separation, although those very circumstances had pushed me into risking the uncertainties of anonymous wandering, which is what he did, set off anonymously into the world. Then in the Gaia station on the train, the shock of being alone felt like a hell realm. When I first left Tergar, that's his monastery, and the taxi didn't show up, he'd ordered a taxi, never came. I had entered the ignorance of the animal realm, not using reason. I returned to my animal mind later by reacting to sounds before investigating their origin or impact. In the hungry ghost realm of insatiable greed, the craving for protection was like a thirst in my heart. In the demigod realm, which is all about jealousy, its inhabitants never stop wishing to be in the God realm. Demigods want to be gods. People who you can see them, I met so many people on Wall Street who were striving to become the billionaires, gods. As a child, my jealousy had been directed toward those with more social freedom than I had, especially when I was a boy and longed to escape the watchful eyes of my caretakers. Yet on this ride, I felt a bit bruised by being totally ignored, and my mind jumped right back into the God realm, for I could smell the stink of pride. That's what characterizes the God realm. Pride. We study the realms in order to learn about the fluidity of the mind. Anything, including Milarepa's life story, demonstrates the constancy of change and helps dismantle our attachments to fixity. No one realm had yet claimed me, but as a long-term resident. I was a traveler, just passing through, and I hoped I could settle into the human realm where we know enough about suffering to want to bring it to an end, and we know enough about happiness to aspire to more of it. The human realm, where we're all born, we're very fortunate, is the best realm in which to pursue the path to enlightenment. Now, there may be some people in this room who are born into human bodies, but who have the mental apparatus of the other realms. And they will need to practice to achieve the mentality, the sanity of the human realm. The wheel signifies circularity, perpetuation, and suffering. Yet every moment provides a chance to wake up without becoming conscious of why we behave the way we do. The patterns keep us spinning in samsara and are reinforced by recurrent behavior. We're doing it all the time. We may be born into a human body, but each one of us can have a different mentality. Maybe we've got a human mentality. That's good. Probably most of the people in this room do, and that's why you're in this room. But you know, and I know, people who are born into the human body who have very different mentalities. They're jealous gods striving to become gods. They're hell beings walking the streets of the East Village of New York, screaming, filthy, unbathed, starving, all kinds of things. Our activities today tend to conform to our ideas of who we think we were yesterday. And this perpetuates the very behavior that limits our capacity for change and transforms our tendencies into patterns that feel immutable. This is the nature of karma. This is what karma does. It becomes these immutable patterns of thinking and behavior. Karma, aspects of our past, are carried forth into each new moment. The way you see the world, the way you envision your possibilities, your problems, your challenges, your failings, your suffering, all of that is your habitual patterns of mind, karma. At the same time, each new moment also provides a chance to relate to old patterns in new ways. We can break the karmic patterns. If we don't take advantage of these opportunities, then there is nothing to interrupt the inherited karma of negative mind states. Inherently, we have free will, yet this only arises from an examined mind, and everybody in this room is examining their minds when we sit and meditate. Our future is influenced but not determined or destined by past conditioning. Until we learn how to examine our minds and direct our behavior, our karmic tendencies will compel habits to reseed themselves and will reenact the old habits again and again, reinforcing our neuroses and our unhappiness. Modern people often talk about themselves in static mental postures, such as, I am an angry person. Don't we do that? I am a jealous person. I'm basically greedy. We characterize ourselves these ways. Highlighting the dominant trait of one realm strengthens karmic tendencies. By funneling our immense complexity into a reductive profile, very simple, I'm a greedy person, I'm an angry person, whatever it may be, we become tricked into thinking that we know ourselves while missing most of what there is to know, this huge panoply that we are walking through in our lives. These realms are considered afflictive, painful, precisely because our attachment to them narrows our experience. We can only see the world through the lenses of these realms. We all spend more time in some states than in others, but when we prioritize one in order to identify the real me, we diminish access to the never-ending variations that influence how and what we perceive. So we see this vast infinity of world through the lenses of these realms which cut it down. This induces our habits to repeat themselves. Instead of saying, "This is who I am," we might reconsider and think, "This is how I sometimes feel. Sometimes I feel angry, sometimes I feel jealous, sometimes I feel proud," whatever it may be. Those are the realms. Taking a step back this way creates some room to maneuver in. Anger, greed, and ignorance can ensnare us like alluring tourist traps, but they're not lifelong residences. The term realm indicates something vast, even though it's no bigger or smaller than the perception we bring to it. In this way, realm can expand the thin bandwidth of me. For example, to know freedom from hell, we must allow aggression to die. If we inhabit anger as if it's the skin of our body, then allowing it to transform feels like death itself. Giving up anger can feel like death. Who am I? Yet the attempts to protect ourselves from this death only perpetuate the very afflictions that keep us imprisoned in anger. It's the mind's habit to experience the transition between realms or between breaths or thoughts as uninterrupted. Yet with examination, we can learn that there's always a gap, a moment of space in between those things that we assume are continuous, just as for breaths or thoughts. Even though we speak of continuous nowness, some moments offer heightened opportunities to recognize the gap and experience a moment of emptiness. Let's say that we take an in-breath. Every moment along the spectrum of breathing, there's another now moment. Yet the moment that is closest to the end of the inhalation, the moment that exists at the very edge of pronounced transition, intensifies our sensitivity to change. Therefore, this moment holds greater potential for accessing awareness of the gaps that are always there. This is why we meditate, to access the gaps that are always there. On the train, I was in the middle of a big interruption, an obvious intentional interruption of my patterns. I was on the edge between the inhale and the exhale. I had not quite left and had certainly not arrived. On the train. The sun had come up. I could not detect when it had risen, but only acknowledged that this had happened. I am in the bardo of becoming, I thought, traversing different realms. With the advent of morning, more chai vendors rushed into the cars at each stop and crowded around the windows. More plastic wrappers and small packages of snacks littered the floor. The train was late as usual, but it would be pulling into the Varanasi station soon. And I am in the bardo of dying, trying to let go of my old life and not yet born into my new one, he writes. At least I am not stuck. I am moving. And with that, I'll stop this presentation and have a discussion, if you like. We'll also be having discussion tomorrow. So I hope you will have read the chapter. These are important chapters describing our state of being. Anyway, horrible stuff. Christy.
Can you hear me okay, John?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, John and Michael, for these amazing discussions. This book has opened so much for me, but I just wanted to bring attention to a part that you just read. Yet the moment that is closest to the end of inhalation, the moment that exists at the very edge of a pronounced transition, intensifies our sensitivity to change. And I just had never come across anything that talked about that in that way. And it just, to me, was just such a, like, aha, like that's, it's so easy to miss just the continuity of the way things work. It's so easy to miss the gap. I mean, and I guess there's certain times when that's intensified, and right at the edge, I just love that, right at the edge of, the breath, like when it changes, that's when we can kind of have the best chance at noticing that gap. I'm still wrapping my head around that conceptually. Like, I've been thinking about that for like 2 years, and it's still, it's still just sort of simmering there for me to totally understand. But I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's terrific. You're sensitized to it very much. Michael, do you have anything?
I was thinking, what will you do in the bardo? The bardo between the end of this talk and the beginning of discussion?
Yeah, what are we all going to do in the bardo? Look at all these gray hairs here. We're approaching the bardo.
Which bardo?
Every moment is a bardo.
Really, Mary?
There you go.
We should wish each other luck.
Yeah. But it's an interesting idea, what you brought up, and what he says there. Every moment is a bardo, but some moments offer heightened opportunities to recognize the gap and experience a glimpse of emptiness.
I think Michael, just to add to that, I think that's maybe why death, and being with somebody that's dying, or being there when somebody's born, they're just these like kind of feel sort of earth-shattering, because the edge is just so palpable, and heightened, and I think that's why we have a great chance to sort of feel that boundless, groundless, ness when those events are happening. But yeah, we can, every moment is that. It just slips right underneath our attention,
Mm-hmm.
So great. I love this book so much.
Yeah.
I feel like I experience it all the time, trying to hold on and create something solid and trustworthy in my life. In fact, it never happens. Everything is slipping through my fingers like water. Steve.
Thank you very much for tonight's lesson. I've been experiencing an interesting change in that uh, we're having to do a bunch of remodeling to our house that involves the attic. And so we're going through the attic and eliminating a lot of the stuff that we have accumulated over our lives. And it's a very interesting lesson in letting go of past lives. And, and it should represent an interesting change of letting go of a lot of childhood memories and going through past experiences and then letting that all go, recycling it, throwing it in the trash, and then moving on from there.
Indeed.
Interesting exercise I recommend.
Yeah.
Steve, do you find yourself digging back through the trash in the middle of the night to retrieve things?
I haven't yet, but yes, the thought crossed my mind. Maybe I didn't want to throw that away.
Meg?
This is kind of, well, my husband recently was dying, and we've just come back from the final day of a clinical trial where they reversed it. And I was, it was cancer, bone cancer. And it's CAR T. It was written up in the New York Times 3 weeks ago, a breakthrough, and they exaggerated it like it'll cure everybody, but they still don't know. They do not know so much. And they don't tell you the projections because they actually don't know. We're part of the statistical data. But I was so interested in my husband because I wanted to know his consciousness because time changed entirely. And we still have the feeling that we do not know what happened. And then at dinner tonight, it was a terrible day. We got caught in the heat trying to get back from where we'd been staying. And he expressed to me his distress that he felt he was constantly having to make accommodations for me. And I'd been told by the doctors exactly what to do as a caregiver, and it would be my responsibilities. So I felt I was doing all these things, and neither of us wanted to be spending these 3 months doing this. We were both quite ticked off. But we were doing what we needed to do, and in spite of all that, we love each other, but the relationship totally changed. And but I was so fascinated because we both meditate a lot. How consciousness changed, how he experienced things so differently in this time, and how you don't know. And now it says, they say, well, you have to live in the moment. They'll know in 5 months. Will the cancer stay away? 11 months. Some people live 5 years. He's 80. You know, we don't want to live till we're 90. It's just the most bizarre experience. But it's perfect coming here. I was late and the Wi-Fi didn't work. But to hear all this, it's so perfect because it's, well, like we moved twice in the last 5 years and getting rid of things is similar. But this was a big one. And yet now it's all been put on hold again. And you go back. Yeah, you feel like you're going back. I don't know how you felt when you went back to Yale, John. But it's really weird.
Here's something weird too. I'm going to share something. Can you see that?
Wow.
Is it showing?
Yep.
There's a kid in a cowboy costume.
That's me. I found that recently. My parents took that, obviously.
But
Long.
isn't that weird? Don't you remember looking out when that was being taken, perhaps? And
No, I don't remember
oh,
a
you don't?
thing
Mhm.
about that. No.
That's interesting. That was, thank you for
I
that.
challenge you, all of you, bring in photos like that so we can see what you looked like 50, 60, 70, in my case, probably more than 70 years ago. Can you imagine? The time just goes, doesn't it? A finger snap.
Well, my father always said that the time went. But I remember looking down at my hands or my feet, and they were little kids' hands or feet. Now they're an old person's hands or feet. And look at that. That is so weird.
Yeah. Time. Well, the teachings say time does not exist. It's a construction of your mind. That's what the Buddhist teachings say, the Dzogchen teachings, the Great Perfection teachings. Sure seems that way to me.
But when you go through these experiences, it's we really get they're like a lesson telling us live in the moment. You always hear live in the moment, but now they're really telling you, you can't know, you can't plan an outcome. It's like, okay, you didn't get the lesson, so we're going to make it a little tougher.
Yeah. But it comes again to what he said. Some moments offer heightened opportunities to recognize the gap and experience a glimpse of emptiness. I think that's what you described really well.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of it. Except I'm a painter too, and it's funny. The Bardo, often I've painted like pears or something, but I didn't paint the pears, I painted the negative space. So I think earlier you were saying something about the form is defined by the emptiness.
Hmm.
It's a technique in painting too, which is interesting applying that.
He said it. I just repeated him.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Vicky has her hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking about something in the past week. I wondered what you all would think about it. Since there is no time, I mean, there really isn't. So, we learned in the Luminosity book about Bardo entering at the door of the womb and entering our existence into another body. Is it possible, even though we feel like we have time here, when that happens, that you could end up in a body, or when people pass, when living things pass and then come into another body, that it would be in the body of something that to us now it would be in the past. In other words, we always think we're going forward. We're not. So the next life, could it actually end up being in terms of how us living now look at it as in the past? Maybe is that going on all the time? Does that make any sense, the question?
Michael?
I'm not sure.
Me neither.
It seemed interesting to me because I was thinking, well, I have a next life. It's likely to be, since it's after I've died now, it would be ongoing, 2030 or something. But what if it's in terms of, would have to translate, of course, to the viewpoint of someone who's actually existing now, in the past, in the 5th century, something like that.
I've heard it described, Vicki, that if you want to know what you're going to be, tomorrow, look at how you are now. That it's really like what we're experiencing and how our mind is right now that determines the next moment. And so that might, end where we what our mind was, in the past. So it's kind of, we want to look at where we're going. It's now. It's where we are now. Does that ring a bell to anybody else?
We have
Right.
we have to end now, so hold this for tomorrow.
Yes, come to discussion group. We enter the bardo of the end of class.
Right. And we'll have the bardo of discussion group tomorrow.
That's right.
And I've got pictures.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm going to put the chants up and we'll end by dedicating the merit generated through this practice to the benefit of all sentient beings. Oops. Sorry, I'm having difficulty here for some reason. Can you see the chants?
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. My computer's just wonky.
Can see dedicating the offering.
It's dedicating the offering is
Yeah, we dedicated the
Yeah,
offering.
John, I can put it up if you want.
Good, why don't you?
Okay. That is... By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone.